The Sparrow hit the canyon wall at an angle that should have killed Danny Cole. Metal screamed against rock, and the world became a spinning nightmare of fire and sparks. He felt the harness dig into his chest as the ship flipped twice, and then slammed into the ground with enough force to crack his teeth together. Then everything went silent except for the hissing of broken pipes and the soft clicking of dying electronics. Danny opened his eyes and tasted blood. The cockpit was dark except for emergency lights that painted everything in dull red. He hung sideways in his seat, suspended by straps that had saved his life. His hands were shaking as he reached for the release buckle. It took 3 tries before his fingers found it, and he dropped hard onto what used to be the wall. Pain shot through his left shoulder, but he could move it. Nothing broken. He had been lucky, and he knew it. The Sparrow was not so lucky. Even in the dim light, Danny could see the damage. The main console was crushed inward where a boulder had punched through the hull. Wires hung like dead vines from torn panels. The smell of burned circuits filled the air and made his eyes water. He crawled toward the cargo bay, pushing aside debris as he went. The door was jammed, but he kicked it 3 times until it gave way with a groan. Inside the bay, he found what he was looking for. A small metal shape lay crumpled against a storage crate, its single optical sensor flickering weakly. Unit 7, his maintenance drone, his only companion on these long-haul trips through empty space. Danny knelt beside the drone and ran his hands over its frame. One of its manipulator arms was bent badly and there were dents across its body, but the core housing looked intact. He found the manual restart switch and pressed it. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the optical sensor brightened and a small speaker crackled to life. "Damage assessment in progress," Unit 7 said in its flat mechanical voice. "Multiple system failures detected. Mobility reduced to 40%. How may I assist you, Danny?" Danny let out a breath he did not know he was holding. "You can start by telling me we are not as dead as I think we are." Calculating. The drone's sensor swept across the ruined cargo bay. Reactor offline. Hull breached in 3 locations. Navigation destroyed. Distress beacon damaged. Survival probability on current resources estimated at 6 standard days. 6 days. Danny closed his eyes and leaned back against the cold metal wall. The nearest outpost was 3 weeks away on foot. 3 weeks across a desert planet that had not seen rain in 200 years. A world called 4, famous for nothing except being a shortcut through an otherwise empty sector of space. He had taken that shortcut to save time. Now it would cost him everything. "What about the beacon?" he asked. "Can we repair it?" Negative. Primary transmitter array was destroyed on impact. Secondary systems require components we do not possess. Danny nodded slowly. He had expected that answer, but hearing it still hurt. No beacon meant no rescue. No one would come looking for a small cargo hauler that vanished in dead space. Ships disappeared out here all the time. It was just the cost of doing business on the frontier. He stood up and made himself think. Panic was a luxury he could not afford. He was a salvage pilot. He had spent 15 years pulling useful things from wreckage and ruin. If anyone could survive this, it was him. "What do we have?" he asked. "Water, food, tools, give me everything." Unit 7's sensor flickered as it accessed inventory records. Water reserves at 23 liters. Emergency rations for 12 days. Standard tool kit intact. 1 portable welder. 1 emergency shelter. 2 environment suits, 1 damaged. 23 liters, 12 days of food. It was something, not enough, but something. Danny walked to the edge of the torn hull and looked outside for the first time. The canyon stretched away in both directions, its walls rising high enough to block the worst of the sun. The ground was covered in rust-colored sand that sparkled faintly where light touched it. Everything was silent and still and completely dead. But there was something else, something that made Danny's heart beat faster. Along the base of the canyon wall, he could see shapes that were not natural. straight lines and sharp angles, structures half buried in the sand. They were old and broken and covered in the same rust color as everything else, but they were definitely artificial. "Unit 7, he said quietly, "what is that?" The drone rolled forward on damaged treads until it reached his side. Its sensor focused on the distant shapes. "Unknown structures. Architecture does not match any human design in my database. Preliminary analysis suggests age of 300 to 500 years. Alien ruins. Danny had heard stories about four, how it used to be home to some species that died out long before humans reached this part of the galaxy. He had always assumed those stories were just tales that pilots told to pass the time. Now he was staring at proof that they were true. "Can you scan them?" he asked. "Any power signatures, any indication of what they were used for?" Unit 7 was silent for a long moment. Trace readings detected, very faint, consistent with dormant machinery, purpose unknown. Dormant machinery. Danny felt something stir in his chest. It might have been hope or it might have been desperation. At this point he could not tell the difference. The aliens who built those structures had lived here once. They had survived on this waterless world somehow. Maybe they had left something behind that could help him do the same. It was a long shot. It was probably a waste of the little time he had left. But sitting in the wreckage of his ship waiting to die was not an option Danny Cole would ever accept. "Come on," he said to Unit 7. "We are going to take a look." "Advisory," the drone replied. "Exploration of unknown alien structures presents significant risk. Recommended course of action is to remain with the ship and await rescue." Danny laughed, but there was no humor in it. "There is no rescue coming, 7. We both know that. Our only chance is to find something useful in those ruins. Water or power or communications equipment, something." He started gathering supplies. Water bottles went into his pack along with rations and the basic tool kit. He checked his environment suit and found it intact. The second suit was too damaged to use, but he stripped it for spare parts anyway. Unit 7 watched him work with its single glowing eye. "Understood," the drone said finally. "I will accompany you. My function is to assist." Danny paused and looked at the battered little machine. It had been with him for 8 years now. 8 years of long hauls and lonely nights and conversations with a voice that had no feelings behind it. But right now Unit 7 was the closest thing he had to a friend in the universe. "Thanks, 7, he said. "I appreciate that." They left the Sparrow behind as the sun began to sink toward the canyon rim. The alien structures grew larger as they approached, revealing doorways and windows and symbols carved into ancient stone. Danny felt small standing before them, small and fragile and very human. But he was still alive, and as long as he was alive he would keep fighting. He stepped into the darkness of the ruins with Unit 7 rolling quietly at his side. Whatever waited inside, he would face it. That was what humans did. They faced the impossible and they refused to stop. The entrance swallowed them whole, and the desert fell silent once more. The darkness inside the alien structure was absolute. Danny activated the light on his suit and watched the beam cut through centuries of stillness. Dust particles danced in the air like tiny stars, disturbed for the first time in ages beyond counting. The corridor stretched before him, wide enough for 3 men to walk side by side. The walls were made of some kind of metal that had turned the same rust color as the sand outside. Strange symbols covered every surface, their meaning lost to time. Danny ran his fingers across them and felt the grooves worn smooth by whatever hands had carved them. Unit 7 rolled beside him, its sensor sweeping back and forth. Air quality acceptable. No biological hazards detected. Temperature stable at 14 degrees. "What about those symbols?" Danny asked. "Can you translate them?" "Negative. Script does not match any known language in my database. Pattern analysis suggests a complex written system with over 400 unique characters." Danny nodded and kept walking. Translation could wait. Right now he needed to find something useful, something that could keep him alive long enough to figure a way off this dead world. The corridor opened into a larger chamber and Danny stopped to stare. The room was massive, its ceiling lost somewhere in the shadows above. Pillars rose from the floor like the bones of giants, each one covered in more of those mysterious symbols. But it was not the architecture that caught his attention. It was the bodies. They lay scattered across the floor, dozens of them. Tall figures with elongated limbs and hard shells that might have been skin or armor. Their heads were triangular with multiple eye sockets, now empty and dark. They had died where they fell, preserved by the dry air that had taken the moisture from their bodies centuries ago. Danny approached one of them slowly and knelt to examine it closer. The creature was nearly 2 meters tall, even curled in death. Its shell was a deep brown color covered in fine cracks like old leather. 4 arms ended in hands with too many fingers. Everything about it spoke of a species adapted for a different world, a different way of living. Danny said quietly, "The species that used to live here, this must be them." Logical conclusion, Unit 7 agreed. Cause of death unclear, no visible wounds or signs of violence. Posture suggests they died in place rather than fleeing. Danny looked around at the scattered remains and felt something heavy settle in his chest. These beings had built cities and developed technology and created a civilization. And then they had simply died out, alone and forgotten on a world that could no longer support them. He wondered if anyone would find his body someday, if some future explorer would kneel beside his dried bones and wonder what kind of creature he had been. He pushed that thought away and stood up. There was no time for philosophy. He needed to keep moving. They passed through several more chambers, each one revealing new details about the vanished. Danny found what looked like living quarters with beds shaped for bodies that bent in unfamiliar ways. He found storage rooms filled with containers made of a material like glass but stronger. Most were empty. Some held objects he could not identify. Unit 7 scanned everything and stored the data. This facility appears to have served multiple purposes, residential and industrial functions combined. Estimated population at peak occupancy was approximately 2,000 individuals. 2,000 people living underground on a dying planet. Danny tried to imagine what that must have been like. The slow realization that their world was failing them, the desperate scramble to survive. They had failed, but maybe they had left something behind that could help him succeed. The answer came when they reached the deepest part of the complex. A set of massive doors blocked their path, sealed tight against whatever lay beyond. Danny examined them carefully and found a control panel covered in dust and symbols. 7, can you interface with this? The drone extended a probe and connected to the panel. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then lights flickered along the door frame and ancient machinery groaned to life. The doors slid open with a sound like distant thunder. Danny stepped through, and his breath caught in his throat. The chamber beyond was enormous. It dwarfed everything else they had seen. The walls curved upward to form a dome that must have been hundreds of meters across. And filling that space was a machine unlike anything Danny had ever encountered. Pipes as thick as tree trunks ran in every direction. Massive cylinders stood in rows like soldiers waiting for orders. Control stations dotted the floor, their screens dark and silent. Everything was covered in rust and dust, but the basic structure was intact. "What is this?" Danny whispered. Unit 7 rolled forward and began scanning. Its sensor moved rapidly, taking in details faster than any human eye could follow. Analysis complete. This facility is a water extraction system, designed to draw moisture from deep underground sources and process it for consumption. Water? Danny felt his legs go weak and he had to lean against a railing to stay upright. Water extraction. on a planet that had been dry for centuries. These aliens had built a machine to pull water from the rock itself. "Can it still work?" he asked, his voice rough with sudden emotion. "Is there anything left to extract?" Scanning. Unit 7 was silent for nearly a minute. Sensors detect a significant aquifer approximately 3 kilometers below the surface. Water reserves estimated at several million liters. However, the extraction system is offline. Primary power source has been depleted for an estimated 200 years. An ocean of water sitting beneath his feet and no way to reach it. Danny laughed bitterly and shook his head. The universe had a cruel sense of humor. He walked through the machine, studying its components with the eye of someone who had spent his life taking things apart and putting them back together. The technology was alien, but the principles were familiar. Pumps and filters and storage tanks. They had faced the same problems as any species trying to survive, and they had solved them in ways that any engineer would recognize. "The reactor on the Sparrow," Danny said slowly. "It is damaged but not destroyed. Could we use it to power this system?" Unit 7 calculated for several seconds. Theoretically possible. The Sparrow's reactor could provide sufficient power for one activation cycle. However, success probability is low. The systems are incompatible. Extensive modifications would be required. Low probability. Danny had built his career on low probability. Every salvage job was a gamble. Every wreck he had ever stripped had been written off as worthless by someone who lacked the imagination to see its potential. He looked around at the silent machinery, at the dream they had built in their final desperate years. They had created this miracle and then died before they could use it. Their failure did not have to be his. "We are going to do it," he said. "We are going to get the reactor from the ship, and we are going to make this work. The journey to the Sparrow and back will consume significant resources," Unit 7 warned. "Water usage will increase due to physical exertion. Probability of success remains below 20%. Then we will have to beat the odds." Danny turned and started walking back toward the entrance. "That is what humans do, 7. We beat the odds." The drone followed without further argument. Its programming did not include the capacity to understand hope or stubbornness, or the human refusal to accept defeat. But it had learned over 8 years of service that Danny Cole was not a man who listened to probability calculations. They emerged from the ruins as darkness fell across the canyon. The stars were coming out overhead, cold and distant, and indifferent to the struggles of one small human on one forgotten world. Danny looked up at them and made a silent promise. He was not going to die here. He was going to make the dead machines live again. He was going to drink water pulled from stone by his own hands. And someday, he was going to fly among those stars once more. The sun rose over 4 like an angry god. Danny watched it climb above the canyon rim and felt the temperature begin its deadly ascent. In 3 hours, the surface would be hot enough to cook flesh. In 6 hours, even the rocks would be too hot to touch. He had to reach the Sparrow before then. Danny checked his pack one more time. Water bottles, tools, emergency kit, everything he would need to extract the reactor core from his ruined ship. Unit 7 waited beside him, its damaged treads leaving crooked tracks in the rust-colored sand. "Ready?" Danny asked. "All systems functional within acceptable parameters. I am ready to accompany you." They set out across the canyon floor. The sand shifted under Danny's boots and made every step an effort. His shoulder still ached from the crash, but he ignored it. Pain was just information. It told you something was wrong. It did not have to stop you from moving forward. The Sparrow was visible in the distance, a dark shape against the orange rock. It looked smaller than Danny remembered, more broken, more hopeless. But somewhere inside that wreckage was a reactor core that could change everything. The heat built steadily as they walked. Danny's suit had cooling systems, but they were designed for space, not desert survival. Sweat dripped down his face and soaked into his collar. He rationed his water carefully, taking small sips only when his throat became too dry to swallow. Unit 7 moved slower than usual. Its damaged treads struggled with the loose sand, and Danny had to stop several times to wait for it to catch up. The drone never complained. It simply kept moving forward one rotation at a time. They reached the Sparrow 2 hours before the sun reached its peak. Danny stood before his ship and felt grief wash over him. The Sparrow had been his home for 8 years, his livelihood, his freedom. Now it was nothing but scrap metal slowly being buried by alien sand. He did not have time for mourning. He climbed through the torn hull and made his way to the engine compartment. The reactor was still intact. Danny had worried that the crash might have cracked the containment vessel, but the engineers who built it had done their job well. It sat in its housing like a sleeping heart, waiting to beat again. Extracting it was another matter. Danny worked for hours in the cramped space. His tools were meant for simple repairs, not major surgery on a ship's power system. He had to improvise constantly, using pieces of wreckage as levers and his own body weight to shift components that should have required a crane. The radiation shielding was the hardest part. The outer layer had cracked in the crash, and Danny had to work around hot spots that made his suit's sensors scream warnings. He ignored them and kept going. A little radiation exposure would not matter if he died of thirst in 3 days. Finally, the reactor came free. It was heavier than Danny expected, nearly 40 kilograms of dense metal and contained energy. He strapped it to a makeshift harness and lifted it onto his back. His knees buckled under the weight, but he locked them straight and refused to fall. "Danny," Unit 7 said from outside the ship, "solar intensity is approaching critical levels. We must begin return journey immediately." Danny climbed out of the wreckage and squinted at the sky. The sun was a white disk of fury directly overhead. The air shimmered with heat waves that made the canyon walls seem to dance. He started walking. The return trip was worse than anything Danny had experienced in his life. The reactor dragged at his shoulders like a living thing trying to pull him down. Every step sent pain shooting through his legs. His water was running low, and he could feel his body beginning to fail. Unit 7 stayed close, its sensor fixed on Danny's vitals. Core temperature elevated, heart rate irregular. Recommend immediate rest. "No rest," Danny gasped. "Keep moving, have to keep moving." The canyon seemed to stretch forever. The alien ruins were visible in the distance, but they never seemed to get closer. Danny's vision started to blur at the edges. His thoughts became slow and thick like honey poured in winter. He fell. The impact knocked the breath from his lungs and drove his face into the burning sand. The reactor pressed down on him like a tombstone. He tried to push himself up, but his arms had no strength left. "Danny," Unit 7 said, "you must rise, you must continue." Danny tried. He really tried. But his body had given everything it had, and there was nothing left to give. The sun beat down on him, and he felt the heat seeping through his suit, cooking him slowly like meat on a grill. This was it. This was how he would die. Face down in alien sand with a useless reactor strapped to his back and no one to mourn him. He closed his eyes and let the darkness take him. When he woke up, the sun was gone. Stars filled the sky above him, and the air was cool against his face. He was lying on something hard, and he could hear the hum of machinery somewhere nearby. Danny turned his head and saw Unit 7 beside him. The drone's optical sensor was dim, and its movements were sluggish. One of its manipulator arms was completely still, apparently burned out. "What happened?" Danny croaked. "You lost consciousness 7 hours ago," Unit 7 said. "I carried you and the reactor to the alien facility. We arrived 43 minutes ago." Danny stared at the drone. "You carried me." "Affirmative. My treads were not designed for sand locomotion while bearing significant weight. Several motor systems overloaded during transport, but my function is to assist you. I performed my function. Danny felt something tight in his chest that had nothing to do with the heat or the exertion. This little machine, this collection of circuits and metal, had dragged him across a burning desert rather than leave him to die. He reached out and placed his hand on Unit 7's dented frame. "Thank you, 7. I would be dead without you." Gratitude acknowledged. However, celebration is premature. Water reserves are at 8%. The reactor still requires installation. Success probability remains significantly below 50%. Danny laughed weakly, always the optimist. He forced himself to sit up and look around. They were inside the alien complex, in one of the chambers near the entrance. The reactor sat nearby, still strapped to its harness. It had made the journey. Everything hurt. His muscles screamed and his skin felt raw and his head pounded with the rhythm of his own heartbeat. But he was alive, and as long as he was alive, he still had a chance. "How bad is your damage?" he asked Unit 7. "Left manipulator arm offline. Right manipulator arm at 60% efficiency. Mobility reduced to 30%. Power reserves at 42%. Danny nodded slowly. The drone had sacrificed itself to save him. Now it was barely functional, held together by determination that a machine should not possess. "We will fix you," Danny said. "After we get the water system running, we will find parts and we will fix you. Repair is not necessary. My function is to assist. As long as I can assist, I am fulfilling my purpose." Danny wanted to argue, but he did not have the energy. Instead, he lay back down and stared at the ceiling. Ancient stones looked back at him, silent witnesses to yet another desperate creature trying to survive on their world. Tomorrow he would begin the real work. Tomorrow he would connect a human reactor to alien machinery and try to pull water from a world that had none. But tonight he would rest. Tonight he would let his body heal and his mind prepare for the challenge ahead. He closed his eyes and dreamed of rain. Danny spent the next 2 days learning to speak the language of the dead. They had left behind more than machines. They had left records, thousands of files stored in crystal data systems that Unit 7 could partially access. Most of it was corrupted beyond recovery, but fragments remained, enough to tell a story that Danny found himself unable to forget. They had been engineers, scientists, dreamers. They had built cities across the surface of their world when it was young and wet. They had developed technology that rivaled anything humans had achieved. They had looked up at the stars and wondered what lay beyond. Then their sun began to change. It grew hotter, brighter, more violent. The oceans started to evaporate. The rivers dried up. The plants died and the animals followed. Within 3 generations, they watched their paradise become a tomb. They tried to adapt. They moved underground. They developed recycling systems that could capture every drop of moisture. They built this facility, this desperate attempt to tap the water that still existed deep below the surface. But they were too slow, too rigid, too bound by traditions that no longer served them. Danny read records of council meetings where leaders argued about whether the old ways should be preserved. He found scientific reports dismissed because they challenged accepted beliefs. He discovered entire populations that refused to relocate because their ancestors had lived in certain places for generations. They had the technology to survive. They had the resources. They had the knowledge. What they lacked was the ability to change. By the time they completed the water extraction system, there were not enough of them left to operate it. The last generation had died here, in these tunnels, surrounded by a miracle they would never use. Danny set down the data pad and looked at the massive machine filling the chamber around him. Pipes and cylinders and pumps, all waiting for power that had run out centuries ago. They had built this for their children, for a future that never came. He was going to make sure their work was not wasted. The reactor sat on the floor where Danny had positioned it. Cables snaked out from its housing, connected to a jury-rigged interface that Unit 7 had helped him construct. The drone had sacrificed components from its own systems to make the connections possible. Its remaining manipulator arm moved slowly now, drained of power but still functional. Final diagnostic complete, Unit 7 reported. Interface is stable. Power transfer should be possible. However, I must note significant risk factors. Tell me. The reactor output must be precisely regulated. Too much power will overload the alien systems. Too little will fail to activate the extraction pumps. The used dedicated control modules for this function. We do not have access to equivalent technology. Danny nodded. He had been wrestling with this problem for hours. The human reactor and the alien machine spoke different languages. Without something to translate between them, the whole system would tear itself apart. "What about you?" he asked. "Could your processing core handle the regulation?" Unit 7 was silent for a long moment. "Theoretically, yes. My core operates on principles similar to the required control modules. However, the power flow would likely damage my primary systems beyond repair." "No," Danny shook his head firmly. "That is not an option. There has to be another way. I have analyzed all available alternatives. None provide acceptable probability of success. The only solution with greater than 5% chance of activating the water system requires my processing core as the regulating interface." Danny stared at the drone. 8 years they had traveled together. 8 years of shared silence in the void between stars. Unit 7 was just a machine. It had no feelings, no dreams, no fear of death. But somehow that made what it was offering worse, not better. "You would be destroyed," Danny said quietly. "My function is to assist you. If my destruction enables your survival, I will have fulfilled my purpose. This is an acceptable outcome." "Not to me." Danny turned away and began packing the chamber. There had to be something he was missing. Some other approach that did not require sacrificing the only companion he had left. He stopped in front of a control station and ran his hands over the dead panels. The aliens had built this system with manual controls. They must have anticipated the possibility of automation failure. Somewhere there had to be a way to regulate the power flow without a computer. His fingers found a lever hidden beneath a layer of dust. He pulled it, and a panel slid open, revealing a tangle of cables and connection points. "7," he said slowly, "what is this?" The drone rolled over and examined the panel. "This appears to be a manual override station that could connect directly to the system and regulate power flow through biological electrical impulses." Danny felt his heart begin to beat faster. Biological impulses, like nerve signals. Correct. The nervous system operated on principles similar to human neurology. Their bodies could serve as organic regulators when necessary. Danny looked at the cables. He looked at his own hands. He thought about what the records had told him. They had lacked the will to change, the courage to do what was necessary to survive. He was not going to make the same mistake. "I can do it," he said. "I can be the regulator." Negative. Unit 7's voice carried something that might have been alarm. The power levels involved would cause severe damage to human tissue. Pain would be extreme. Probability of cardiac arrest is significant. "But it could work." "Theoretically, yes, but Danny, the risk to your life is unacceptable. My sacrifice is the logical choice. I am a machine. You are human. Your survival has greater value." Danny knelt beside the drone and looked into its single optical sensor. "You carried me across a burning desert, 7. You gave up parts of yourself to save me. That is not the behavior of a machine that has no value. I was performing my function, nothing more. Maybe, or maybe you have become something more than your programming. Either way, I am not going to let you die for me, not when there is another option." He stood up and began connecting cables to his environment suit. The suit had electrical systems designed to interface with his nervous system. With some modifications, those systems could connect to the override station. Unit 7 watched in silence as Danny worked. When he was finished, a web of cables ran from the alien panel to contacts on his chest, his arms, his temples. He looked like some kind of strange hybrid creature, half human and half machine. "Ready to begin power transfer on your command," Unit 7 said. Danny took a deep breath. He thought about thee and their failure. He thought about the water waiting 3 kilometers below his feet. He thought about every moment in his life that had led to this one. "Do it," he said. The reactor hummed to life. Power flowed through the cables and into Danny's body. Pain exploded through every nerve he possessed. His muscles locked tight and his jaw clenched so hard he felt teeth crack. Electricity coursed through him like fire made liquid, burning pathways through his flesh that had never been meant to carry such loads. But underneath the pain he could feel something else. The alien system was awakening. Ancient machines were stirring in the darkness below. Pumps that had been silent for centuries were beginning to turn. Danny screamed, but he did not let go. He held the connections tight and forced his mind to focus through the agony. He could sense the power flow now, could feel where it needed to go and how much was required. His body had become a living regulator, translating between human technology and alien machinery. The chamber began to shake. Somewhere deep underground, something enormous was moving. The sound of rushing water filled the air, faint at first but growing stronger. Then Danny's heart stopped. He felt it happen. One moment it was beating frantically against his ribs. The next moment there was nothing. Silence inside his chest where life should be. Unit 7 moved faster than should have been possible on damaged treads. Its remaining manipulator arm grabbed the cables connected to Danny's chest and pulled them free. The connection broke and Danny collapsed to the floor. The drone's sensor swept across his body. Cardiac arrest detected, initiating emergency resuscitation. An electrical pulse shot through Danny's chest. His body jerked. Nothing happened. Another pulse, and another, and another. On the 5th try, Danny's heart started beating again. He gasped and opened his eyes. Above him the chamber was filled with new sounds. The grinding of gears, the whoosh of pumps, and underneath it all, a sound he had almost forgotten. The sound of flowing water. Water came out of the darkness like a miracle. Danny lay on the floor of the ancient chamber and watched it happen. Pipes that had been dry for centuries now carried liquid life through the facility. Storage tanks that had stood empty since before his grandparents were born began to fill. The sound of it echoed off the stone walls and made music that no human had ever heard in this place. He tried to sit up and failed. His body felt like it had been turned inside out. Every muscle ached. His heart beat in an unsteady rhythm that worried him. Burns marked his skin where the electrical connections had been, red lines tracing paths across his flesh. But he was alive, and the water was flowing. Unit 7 rolled to his side. The drone looked worse than ever. Its treads were barely turning. Its manipulator arm hung limp. Its optical sensor flickered like a dying star. "System activation successful," Unit 7 reported, its voice scratchy and faint. "Water extraction rate is 400 liters per hour. Storage capacity will reach sustainable levels within 72 hours. Danny laughed. It hurt to laugh, but he could not help himself. 400 liters an hour. More water than he could drink in a lifetime. More water than any creature had seen on 4 in generations. He had done it. They had done it. "7," he said, "come here." The drone moved closer, its damaged systems struggling to respond. Danny reached out and placed his hand on its frame, feeling the heat of overworked circuits beneath the metal skin. "Thank you," he said, "for saving my life again." I was performing my function. Resuscitation protocols are standard emergency procedures. No, Danny shook his head weakly. You did more than that. You chose to save me. You made a decision. That is not programming. That is something else. Unit 7 was silent for a moment. I do not understand what you mean. Maybe not. Maybe you never will, but I know what I saw, and I am not going to forget it. The next few weeks passed slowly. Danny recovered from his injuries bit by bit, drinking water that tasted like stone and victory. He explored the facility more thoroughly now that survival was no longer a desperate race against time. He found food sources, processed nutrients that they had stockpiled. He found sleeping quarters that he made his own. He found tools and materials that would help him with the work ahead. Because Danny had a plan now, a real plan that went beyond simple survival. The water extraction system was fully operational. The facility had power and resources and enough space to house a small colony. With some modifications, it could become a place where ships crossing the empty sectors could stop and resupply. It would take months to set up, years maybe, but Danny had nothing but time. He started with Unit 7. The drone had sacrificed too much to be left in its damaged state. Danny scavenged parts from both human and technology, combining them in ways that should not have worked but somehow did. He rebuilt the treads using alien materials that were stronger than anything humans had invented. He repaired the manipulator arms with components from his own damaged environment suit. He upgraded the power systems using crystals from data storage. When he was finished, Unit 7 was something new, something that had never existed before. A machine that was neither fully human nor fully alien, but a combination of both. Diagnostic complete, the drone said, its voice clearer and stronger than before. All systems operational, mobility at 100%, manipulator efficiency at 120%. This unit is functioning beyond original specifications. Danny smiled. How do you feel? Unit 7 paused. It had never been asked that question before. I feel functional, I feel capable, I feel ready to assist. Good, because we have a lot of work to do. 37 days after the crash, a ship appeared in the sky above 4. Danny watched it descend through the atmosphere, its engines leaving white trails against the orange sky. It was a trading vessel, larger than the Sparrow had been. It must have detected the power signature from the reactivated facility and come to investigate. He walked out to meet it as it landed in the canyon. The sand swirled around him and the engines roared, but he stood his ground and waited. A hatch opened and a woman stepped out. She was tall with dark skin and suspicious eyes. Her hand rested near the weapon on her hip as she approached. I am Captain Laura Hayes of the Meridian, she said. We picked up some strange readings from this area. Care to explain what is going on here? Danny smiled and spread his hands. Welcome to station. I am Danny Cole and I am the owner and operator of the water supply depot in the sector. The captain stared at him. She looked at the ancient alien structures behind him. She looked at the strange hybrid drone rolling at his side. She looked at the burns still healing on his skin and the ragged state of his clothes. You are telling me you crashed on a dead planet and built a water station from alien ruins? That is exactly what I am telling you. That is impossible. Danny laughed. I get that a lot. Would you like to come inside and see for yourself? I can offer you fresh water at very reasonable prices. Captain Hayes did not believe him, but she followed him into the facility anyway, and her disbelief slowly faded as she saw what he had accomplished. She saw the ancient machines humming with power. She saw the storage tanks filled with clean water. She saw the living quarters where a single human had turned alien ruins into a home. By the time she left, she had agreed to spread word of station to other traders in the sector. She had also agreed to bring supplies on her next visit, and she had looked at Danny with something that might have been respect. I have been traveling these routes for 15 years, she said before boarding her ship. I have seen a lot of things, but I have never seen anything like this. You should be dead. Probably, Danny agreed, but humans are stubborn that way. She laughed and shook her head. That they are. I will see you in 3 months, Danny Cole. Try not to die before then. The meridian lifted off and disappeared into the sky. Danny watched it go and felt something warm spread through his chest. He was not alone anymore. He had made contact with the galaxy again. Unit 7 rolled up beside him. Probability analysis suggests that station will attract significant traffic within the next year. This location could become an important waypoint for ships crossing the dead sectors. I know, Danny said. That is the plan. He looked around at the world that had tried to kill him. The rust-colored rocks and the metallic sand and the ancient ruins that held the ghosts of a species that had given up. They had built a miracle and then died because they could not change. They could not adapt. They could not do what was necessary to survive. Humans were different. Humans took the impossible and made it possible through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. They crashed on dead worlds and built new futures from the wreckage. They made machines into partners and turned alien technology into salvation. That was what made humanity special. Not strength or intelligence or technology. It was the simple truth that humans never stopped trying. No matter how bad things got. No matter how hopeless the situation seemed. 7, Danny said quietly. Do you know what they got wrong? Their records suggest multiple societal and technological failures. No, they got one thing wrong, the most important thing. Danny placed his hand on the drone's frame. They forgot that survival is not about preserving what you were. It is about becoming what you need to be. He turned and walked back toward the facility. There was work to do, systems to improve, a future to build. Behind him, Unit 7 followed. And somewhere deep underground, water continued to flow through pipes that had been silent for centuries. Life had returned to 4, human life, stubborn and adaptable and absolutely refusing to die. The universe would just have to learn to live with that.